swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Please have a seat. Yes, Mr. Moss.
Thank you, sir. Just start by giving us your full name, if you would.
Lindsay Ann Boggan.
Thank you. And if we can have on screen, please, your statement. It's AHCH 30252, Ms. Boggan. Do we see that this is the statement that you gave to this inquiry, dated this year, the 29th of July?
Yes, it is.
And can you just confirm for us, please, that the contents of that statement are true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Let me just start by going through your background. You tell us in paragraph 1 that you're currently employed as the clinical lead of the neurodevelopmental services for Alderhay Children's NHS Foundation Trust. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
You qualified, I think, as a registered nurse for learning disabilities. Was that back in April 2004?
Yes, that's correct.
And you worked then in child and adolescent mental health services, I think, for over 15 years, including a stint as clinical lead of the Holton and St Helens Autism Assessment Team.
Yes, that's correct.
And so during that period, you would have had direct experience yourself, is this right, of autism diagnosis?
Yes, that's correct.
And then coming to matters in relation to Alderhay, and the dates are perhaps important for us to stand when we map it across with what was happening with AR. You tell us in paragraph 2 that you started working at Alderhay on the 29th of June as a specialist practitioner working with children and young people with the Learning Disabilities and Autism team. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. That was in Liverpool CAMS team.
Yeah. So, as you're going to come on to tell us in a moment, you had 2 roles. That first one was part of the Liverpool, not the Sefton, but the Liverpool CAMS team, yes?
That's correct.
So that's a different CAMS team, I think, to the one in which AR had CAMS involvement.
Yes, that's correct.
But as you go on to explain in your statement, you also were asked to provide clinical support, I think 2 days a week, to the Autism Spectrum Disorder Diagnostic Service. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Because you had the requisite experience in that area from your previous role?
Yes, correct.
So you were wearing those 2 hats, yes? Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. And then, as I've understood it, as time went on, you became more involved in the autism diagnostic side, and in this way, you became the interim head of the service for ASD on the 1st of November 2020?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then you became the full-time head of that service on the 15th of March 2021?
Yes, that's correct.
And by those stages, were you working full-time in that area, rather than just 2 days a week, or was it still 2 days a week?
The full-time role started in March 21, the 15th of March, and then that was made permanent in August 2021.
You became permanent in that. So from March 21, you were working purely on that side?
Yes, that's correct.
I follow. And then coming right up to date, you tell us that your current post as the clinical lead of neurodevelopmental service for Alderhay was one you were appointed to in May of this year. Is that right?
Yes, that's
How was
correct.
that different to the previous full-time role?
So now I have responsibility for the whole of the neurodevelopmental service. So that includes the autism diagnostic side, the ADHD diagnostic side, and also the ADHD treatment component. So I have overall responsibility for the service as a whole.
Thank you. So was that effectively on a promotion?
Yes, it was.
I follow. So I think you'll come on to the detail of this, but I think your own direct involvement with AR was actually fairly limited the 3rd of February 2021, I think a not-in-person discussion.
Yes, that's correct.
But you're able to help us, given your now senior position, in something of a corporate capacity, having familiarised yourself with the notes, although your own involvement was really quite limited.
Yes, that's correct.
And the issues I think that you can help us with are AR's involvement with autism diagnosis and care and signposting for his autism, yes?
Yes, that's correct.
And I think you've also reviewed in some detail how concerns about his ADHD were addressed.
Yes, that's correct.
But we bear in mind that this is largely through your reviewing the records rather than any involvement you had at the time.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Now, against that background, you explain, just looking at the way that the services were organised, could we have on screen, please, page 3 of your statement, paragraph 11. And you make the point there that the autism spectrum disorder and ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder services at Alderhay have developed, your words, significantly over time. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, certainly to the uninitiated, the picture is perhaps a little confusing.
Yeah.
And I want you to help everybody to understand how it was at the time and how it has changed.
Yes.
So can we start with how things were in 2019, accepting that that was before you even came to Alderhay? But should we understand from your statement that at that time in 2019, when AR was first referred, the assessment and diagnosis of both autism and ADHD fell within the community paediatric service?
Yes, that's correct.
And how would patients be referred in to the community paediatric service for if their teachers or the parents had concerns about autism or ADHD?
So that would be a referral process. So either the GP or the school or a professional who's involved with the child or young person could make a referral. And that was mainly on paper at the time, that would come in to the department and be logged as a referral through the central referrals team at Alderhay Community Division, and then would be added to a waiting list and then triaged and reviewed in turn by the community paediatrician who lived in that locality area. So for AR, it would have been over in Southport.
Thank you. And yesterday, and I think you were able to follow some of the evidence yesterday, we were dealing with CAMS, and we should understand that this is a completely separate team who at that time were dealing with it, yes?
Yes, completely separate from CAMS, yes.
Thank you. You go on to explain that in March 2021, it's the same paragraph of your statement as we have on screen, there was a trust-wide programme to restructure the service, and that resulted in the separation of the referral pathways for ADHD and ASD. So looking at those aspects, did they remain within community paediatrics at that time, or did they become self-contained separate teams?
Yes, so the transformation programme did commence in 2020, but it was quite a large-scale transformation in terms of digital aspects as well. So what happened was new referral forms were created for both ASD, ADHD and community paediatrics to split them out into separate services. So at the time, in March 2021, that was when the process was complete, and they became 3 very separate services. So community paediatrics were no longer had oversight for either ASD or ADHD.
Thank you. So some initial changes with the forms. So there would have been a period, is this right, when the forms were separated out, so it was no longer a community paediatrics general form, but it was still under the umbrella of the community paediatrics team, but then dealing with things to so that the changes weren't happening overnight. By March 21, they were now separate teams for mainstream, if I can use that phrase, community paediatrics. Then you would have the autism spectrum disorder team and the ADHD team or service.
That's correct.
Thank you. You go on to, so that's the structural change. You go on to explain in paragraph 12 that the focus of both services, so autism and ADHD, was diagnostic assessment. Is that right?
Yes. At that time, the Autism Diagnostic Service was only commissioned for diagnosis only. ADHD...
Let's stick for the moment with... No, not at all. It's very helpful, but if we can just take it in stages so that we get it clear. So if we stick with the autism service, as I've understood it from your statement, the referral would come in, and there's quite a lot of work, as we'll look at, I think, in AR's case, that would need to be done with different types of assessment that led, as we'll come on to with AR, eventually to a multidisciplinary panel, I think, considering the referral. Is that right in simplistic terms?
Yes. So the referral was triaged, reviewed, and then a plan would have been put in place to capture the assessment information that was required. In AR's case, that was speech and language therapy assessment and a neurodevelopmental history assessment.
We'll come back to AR's case, but
okay.
From referral assessment to the referral,
yes.
There's some technical assessment, speech and language and things of that kind that would need to be done. And assuming that at each stage of that pathway, it was looking like there may be an issue to be considered.
Yes.
The end result of that would be a multidisciplinary team meeting.
Yes, that's correct.
At which the diagnosis would be confirmed.
Yes, that's correct.
And when you say in your statement the primary focus was diagnostic assessment, is it right that for autism, a diagnosis having been made of autism, the team would have retained a responsibility for how the diagnosis was conveyed and explained to the patient?
Yes, that's correct.
So it's not a question of multidisciplinary team meets diagnosis on paper and that's the end of it. Mm-hmm. There's the important process of explaining the diagnosis. But thereafter, was it a question, the diagnosis having been made, of then, slightly cliched phrase, but signposting the patient and their family to where support services for the autism spectrum disorder could be obtained?
Yes, that's correct. So the feedback appointment, we would explain all the different services available in that area. So that would have been Sefton, Southport, and then the parents can then have the opportunity to access them services if they wish to. Yes.
Thank you. And who would the providers of those services have been? Just give us a real-world flavour for them.
At the time, it was mainly the voluntary sector, voluntary independent sector. So Advanced Solutions Community Network was commissioned in Sefton to provide some support. There was also Parenting 2000. You've got the CAMS service as well for sort of any mental health difficulties. There was also some voluntary mental health support in the Venus Centre. There was also Aiming High, which is like a mentorship support scheme. And then also there was a small team called the Sefton ASD ADHD nursing service where they were able to offer some minimal intervention. So there was quite a lot of support that they could have accessed in terms of understanding. And then obviously school services as well. There was a school inclusion team and specialist teacher service that would support in the education aspects of an autism diagnosis.
Thank you. And I appreciate that this question may sound naive and it's second nature to you, but it's helpful, I think, for you to explain it. Why, with an autism diagnosis, does it not lead to ongoing clinical care by a team of doctors and nurses?
Yes, so autism spectrum disorder is obviously a difference in thinking and is classified in terms of a young person's thinking styles, how they interact with others, sensory differences and rigidities around black and white thinking. And every young person or child with autism is quite different from another. Some young people can be quite high functioning and go on well in mainstream school and not need any support to thrive. Some young children may have significant language difficulties alongside. They may need involvement from speech therapy and things. So because every child is unique, we would look at a needs-led approach instead of just a blanket, this is what we do for children who are autistic. So if a young person did need additional services, that they would have been referred to them if that makes sense. But that would have been around different areas of health or different areas of need. Generally, we have the Equality Act, we have the SEND Code of Practice, so there are standards and guidelines that we would follow, and they all really discuss how society as a whole needs to put reasonable adjustments in place for young people with neurodiversity. So for school, for example, breaks, sensory breaks, being able to leave the class. So these are all like very small, reasonable adjustments that we would expect to be put in place based on the needs of that young person, rather than just a blanket sort of, we need to do this. Also, for autism, there isn't a diagnostic, there isn't a treatment or it sounds, like a cure for it. There isn't anything that we can prescribe to make things better. We just need to have a good understanding of how autism impacts on that specific young person, what their areas of need are, and how we can support with in terms of intervention, which is mainly in the form of parent training and parent support, which is set out in the NICE guidance as well. So NICE guidance clearly states, that parents need to have an understanding to adapt the environment at home and understand how it can be impacted. So I hope that answers the question. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
So not at all, it's very helpful. So that helps from hearing it from you as an expert in this area to explain why the whole approach is completely different for autism as a neurodivergence condition from a mental health disorder such as depression or an anxiety disorder or a psychosis where you may have a patient who's under the care of a psychiatrist, yes?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. So I'd really interrupted you to get you to stick with autism being a diagnostic service. And you've explained that would be not just diagnosis, but also the conveying of the diagnosis, but then signposting on to other services. Can you now go on to ADHD? Because I think that was principally, at the time, a diagnostic service, but with one exception. Can you just explain that?
Yes. So at the time, the ADHD assessment service would conduct an assessment with the young person and feedback that diagnostic outcome in the same way that I've explained that they would with autism. However, there was a small part of the service which could provide treatment for children and young people who had significant symptoms of ADHD. So if there was evidence of a significant impairment and they met the criteria for treatment in terms of like physical health checks and things that needed to be in place, then they could go on to be prescribed treatment. And the treatment side of the service would it was a nurse-led service with some input from some paediatric time, but they would complete reviews with children and young people to check sort of compliance with medication, side effects, and whether it was being efficient.
And I think in paragraph 12, you described that part of the service as the medication initiation clinic.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Can I ask, for the purposes of most of your evidence, to stick with that way in which it was at the time,
Okay.
but we'll come on to the changes since towards the ends of your evidence. I want to turn now to questions about the assessment of risk by the autism service. So if we could look, please, at page 16 of your statement. And if we could have on screen paragraphs 62 and 63 expanded, please, Sarah. You say there, within the CAMS team at Alderhay, risk assessment is understood as a dynamic and ongoing process which is updated in response to any changes in the young person's risk presentation, all right? And I'm going to come back to that a little later in my questions. But you were referring to initially under risk assessment there to the separate CAMS service, yes?
Yes, that's correct.
In paragraph 63, you said that during the period of AR's involvement with the Autism Diagnostic Service, there was no formal Meditech risk assessment pro forma in use for documentation. Just pausing there. What electronic patient record system was the autism service using at the time when it was under community paediatrics and then when it was a separate service?
It's used the Meditech system.
And would that, how did the interplay work with CAMS records?
Yes, so we were able to view CAMS records because they were on the same system.
Did you need a permission for that, or could you just go to a separate part of Meditech and see it, or were they somehow combined?
They're not combined, but you can search for CAMS records. You didn't need specific permission. You know, the information was there to view. So.
Thank you. So against that background, though, you tell us that there was no specific risk assessment form for the autism team in use at that time for risk. And was that risk to self and risk to others?
Yes, yes. There was no specific form at all at that time.
So can you help us in general terms, as somebody had been referred in and was going through these various stages of testing and analysis and referrals, how would risks to self and risk to others be addressed and assessed? Were they assessed at all? Was that part of the work of the team?
So I would say that discussion of risk wouldn't have been a main characteristic of the assessments that the team did. However, they are obviously all trained in safeguarding and how to manage if an incident did occur. So what would happen in that circumstances if a parent, young person, you know, had identified a risk or something that had happened, then the clinician would act accordingly and take steps to support that risk in terms of safeguarding referrals or liaison with Alderhay safeguarding team, etc. But they wouldn't actually ask direct questions to explore risk as part of the assessment for autism at the time.
So the Alderhay safeguarding team, where do they sit?
So they are part of our community division, and they offer support and advice in times when clinicians may not be as experienced in risk, because the community speech therapy role obviously is quite an important role within the diagnostic team. So their role in risk management would be quite small in comparison to a CAM, so it's quite different. So they would often use the safeguarding team for advice and support of when to pursue, when to act on certain challenges that might be presented.
Thank you. And so that safeguarding team within the community division, would this be right, that they then could take action with any concerns about risk, which might then involve getting CAMs involved?
Yes. They would either take on that risk and do that, or they would inform the clinician what to do and the steps to follow.
Right, so it might be direct advice back to the clinicians within the autism service, but it might be getting different parts of all the Hay services involved, including CAMs.
Yes, that's correct.
And might that also involve liaison with other agencies, so on the social care and child and family wellbeing side with the local authority?
Yeah, that's correct.
But you wouldn't see the assessment and dealing of risk as part of the everyday role of the autism team, but they would need to know where to get advice if it arose. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you. You say, though, that however risk was assessed at every appointment and appropriate action taken in response to any safeguarding concerns. When you say risk was assessed at every appointment, is that literally true?
I would probably amend that to say risk was observed maybe, and yeah, so I think what I meant by that was that any risks that have been highlighted by parents or young people was acted upon. And I think the example that I give is regarding parents' concern that AR would react, quite, he would struggle to accept the diagnostic decision and might need support with that. So we put in a safety plan around how we would do that in a sensitive way. So I think what I've meant by that is we've looked at, how to mitigate risk, rather than actually completing a literal risk assessment document.
So you understand that when you say in your statement, however, risk was assessed at every appointment, that might give some the impression that somehow there was a formal process by which at each and every meeting you would go through an assessment of risk. You didn't mean that?
Yeah, I didn't mean that. Apologies.
No. That's why we seek to clarify these matters. So should we understand that what you really mean is in the sense that any nurse or doctor or specialist therapist who's dealing with a patient who's being assessed would keep in their back of the mind, is there something I need to be worried about with risk with my patient? In that general sense, that the autism service would be mindful of risk issues.
Yes.
Is that a fairer way to put it?
Yes.
We've heard evidence about a specific risk tool, the SAVRI, the Structured Assessment of Violence Risk in Youth tool, which is a more sophisticated form of risk assessment, leading to a gradation of risk. From the answers you've given so far, would I be right to think that the autism service wasn't, generally speaking, trained in that tool and wouldn't really being expected to do that sort of more sophisticated risk assessment?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Can I turn then, please, to AR's history and his involvement with an assessment of diagnosis for autism? Can we pick this up, please, in paragraph 14 of your statement, which is at page 4, Sarah? And I just go to this to remind ourselves that, in fact, at the time of the referral, you weren't yet even working at Alder Hay. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
But in paragraph 15, you explain that AR was first referred to the Community Paediatric Service on the 14th of August 29. And who was that by?
That was by his GP, Dr. Arnold.
And sir, for your note, we don't need to turn it up, but MERP 30490 is where you'll find the record of this.
Thank you.
And just in broad terms, you've got paragraph 16 on screen, but just help us to understand the nature of the concerns that the GP was raising.
Yes, so the GP was concerned that AR was struggling in terms of social interactions, also poor eye contact and hyperfixation on specific interests. I don't think they went into detail about what the interests were at that time, but it was clear that there was evidence that an assessment should take place.
Thank you. And I think there was also a family history.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. So you deal in paragraph 16, just looking at the chronology, that's logged on to the systems on Meditech on the 18th of August, 4 days after the referral. And if we look at paragraph 17, the referral was accepted by the Community Paediatric Department and AR is added to the waiting list. Who would have reviewed that to check the initial acceptance?
At the time, the triage process was directly with the community paediatrician for that locality area. So it would have been the community paediatrician who reviewed and accepted the referral.
Thank you. You tell us in paragraph 17, is this right, that at the time, the average waiting time for the first assessment was 11 weeks?
Yes, that information was provided to me by our behaviour intelligence team, and they gave me the information to say that the average waiting time is 11 weeks.
Yeah. And again, you're right to remind us that you're giving evidence here in part in a corporate capacity. Yes. You will have got this information from others, but that is the information that's been provided to you.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. And it follows, doesn't it, that for that first appointment, we would have been expecting to see AR seen for a first assessment in around about the middle of November 2019.
Yes, that's correct.
We know, because you deal with it in this paragraph and later in your statement, that he didn't in fact receive the first appointment until the 2nd of July 2020, over 45 weeks, yes?
Yeah, that's correct.
And not least because you weren't in post at the time, you'll understand that I don't raise these matters in any way as a criticism of you individually at all. But having no doubt done your best to gather information about this, in your now role, you candidly say in your statement that you're not able to comment on why that first appointment took so long. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Other than to make a comment that you accept is speculation that the impact of COVID influenced the increase in the waiting time. Yes,
yes, that's correct.
If, and I appreciate that I'm asking these questions through you with the information that you've obtained, not about your personal involvement, but if you would have expected the first appointment around mid-November, for COVID to have had an impact, it would already have had to have fallen quite far behind the average waiting time, wouldn't it? If one thinks about the very end of January, beginning of February as being the start of the pandemic, it was already well overdue by the time the pandemic started to influence the nation.
Yes, that's correct.
And again, it's not a criticism of you, but you've simply not been able to understand why AR's individual case had fallen so far behind even before COVID struck.
Yes, that's correct.
no doubt for all services, obviously, everyone has an understanding of the impact of COVID, but no doubt it's a sensible inference that COVID then made things worse. Would that be fair?
Yes, that's correct.
But on the face of it, you say elsewhere that timescales for ADHD and for autism are in a situation of crisis, and we'll look at that. But based upon what the service's average waiting time was, even making allowance for COVID, it looks like there was a shortcoming, would you agree, in the speed with which AR had his first appointment?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Thank you. In the meantime, as you explain in paragraph 18 of your statement, it's right that the service received communication from the Acorns school, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct.
The essence of that was the deputy, at the time, the deputy head teacher, Joanne Hodson, I think, raising concerns about issues that had arisen and wanting, in broad terms, to draw those to the attention of the autism service, no doubt because she thought it would be relevant to the referral. Yes?
Yes, that's correct.
So could we have on screen, please, LCC 201417? If we could go to page 3, please. The very bottom of the page, if you would, please, Sarah. So this is the 22nd of November from Mrs. Hodson, and we can see that the email addresses are community paediatrics at Alderhay. Really need some help with a referral for a young man who's presenting to us as autistic. We need to refer him onto this pathway. Involved in an incident at school, disclosed the child line, and so on. And so she's referring there to what we know as the October 2019 incident at the Range School. And she gives some details in relation to that, but flags, does she not, significant risk of emotion and awareness with regards to AR carrying a knife, implications in using one, and the risk posed to himself and the school community. And she had then asked him about the incident at the admissions meeting for the school, and monotone, emotionless, and very matter-of-fact about his intentions, yes?
Yes.
So that is flagging both a safeguarding concern, would you agree, but also factors that might be relevant to the autism diagnosis.
Yes, that's correct.
If we just go over the page. Then sets out that there'd been a referral into CAMS, but that it would turn down at that stage. And then more information about AR not socialising, not going out of the family home, no friends, not involved in gangs, and that's a reference to why the group that he'd been passed on to by CAMS on the referral. Now have serious safeguarding concerns with regard to AR. He's fixating on another student in his class and saying that he's bossing him around and bullying him. Staff are being vigilant but have seen no evidence of this. Dad has contacted school to raise his concerns that AR is being targeted, quote, like the other boy in the other school, end quote. Then there's a reference to AR researching school shootings. His father hadn't been informed of that, but then father claiming that it was untrue. And she attached supporting documents on the form that was completed for Lancashire CAMS, but that they had indicated that they were unable to accept AR because he was with a Sefton GP. So that letter, would you agree, on its face, good practice in the sense of it's exactly information that you would want the service to be receiving from the point of view of relevant information to an autism diagnosis that was in the course of being assessed?
Yes, that's correct.
And then there was a follow-up email, I think on the 3rd of December. So if we can just go back, please, to page 3. Forgive me, just page 2, I think. Yes, bottom of the page, please, Sarah. Thank you very much. So again, to Community Paediatrics, 3rd of December. Further to my referral, I need to revise you of further developments and concerns. Could you add this to the referral information? And then the school shootings in America is referred to again. And then incident on the 29th of November, punching his hand, started to work very reluctantly, and then goes into the information that we traversed yesterday about a business, setting up a business and what would be said. Not be good to tell people about setting up a business because people would think he would kill them, as he did not know him. He said that people don't. If you can go back to page 3. Trust others they don't know in case they get murdered. Regularly out of his seat, walked to the highest part of the ceiling, jumped up and punched the laminate that was hanging from it. And then 3rd of December, the most recent one, within art lesson, and this is the colouring the Call of Duty images incident, saying, why can we have these with guns but can't look at guns on the internet? Can we have a picture of a severed head then? And she set out how that was responded to. So, in fact, it looks, doesn't it, as though the Acorn School here was making a referral, but in fact this was all good information to be aware of for the referral that in fact had already been received and was starting to go through the pipeline.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. That can come down from the screen. You say in paragraph 19 of your statement, if you could have that on screen, please, it's page 5. Paragraph 19, you've looked into this and, again, seeking to assist the inquiry from work on the records. Are you able to tell us what, if any, response was given by the Autism Service to those letters?
Yeah, unfortunately, I wasn't able to view a formal response. The emails went to a community paediatric inbox, which was governed at the time by the community paediatric team, and I wasn't able to find a response, unfortunately. However, I did review the records, and there did seem to be services that had become involved at that time, following the concerns that Acorn School had. For example, the CAMS team and obviously criminal justice liaison, but this was me reviewing sort of after, if that makes sense. Yes.
Can I suggest that, and again, not a criticism of you, but looking at what the records show, that is a concern in 2 respects. The first respect, in a sense, you've already touched on, and that's the safeguarding aspect. As it happens, as the inquiry has been looking at, a number of other agencies were seeking to deal with the safeguarding and risk issues in relation to this, and so that we know that over time Prevent was involved, the school was involved, the local authority was involved, CAMS, FCAMS. So other parts of the system were looking at this. But it's right, isn't it, that given that those emails from the Acorn School had raised significant issues as to risk and safeguarding that were of concern, you would want to have seen the autism service within community paediatrics responding on the record in some way, not necessarily dealing with those safeguarding risks themselves, but assuring themselves that they were being dealt with.
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
And would you agree that it is concerning that there is no such record of any such response?
Yes, I would, yeah.
And secondly, can I suggest that the way in which this may be concerning is this? Given that there was already a referral from the GP, and this is now a school which was a referral unit with a deputy head who is showing, would you agree, a good working knowledge of what may be relevant to an autism diagnosis, yes?
Yes, I'd agree.
Alongside the concerns about behaviour and safeguarding risks, would you not think that these emails ought to have triggered a prioritisation of AR's case through the diagnosis pipeline?
Yes, I would expect that, yeah.
And in particular, if we track back to the timeline that you were helping with us a little bit earlier this morning, one of the obvious things, certainly by the 3rd of December email, should have been, hang on a minute, we're already past our 11-week average, and this is a young man in relation to whom there are serious safeguarding concerns, carrying knives, serious risk issues. He needs to be seen now very quickly for the assessment.
Yeah, unfortunately at the time, I don't think there was an expedition process, as far as I'm aware. But again, that's, I'm not really 100% sure on that. But
Well, to an extent, one understands that,
yeah.
but you don't need a defined process to pick up the phone on receipt of an email like that, check the position, and just to say to those who are giving the appointments, we're already late with this pupil. We've now got 2 people referring in, and he's been carrying knives to school and looking at school shootings and talking about severed heads. This is one to do quickly.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah,
Yes.
that doesn't need some formal process. It just needs the application of common sense. And in fact, the assessment still was not offered until July.
Yeah, yeah.
And does that seem to be, again, appreciating that you're in the unfortunate position of having to speak for others in the service at the time, but does that seem to you on reflection to be a marked shortcoming?
Yes, I would agree. Yes.
Thank you. We know that CAMS were involved at this stage. They're one of the bodies that I've spoken about in terms of others who were dealing with this. And there was a strategy meeting, and then we know that Mr. Morgan of CAMS had a meeting with AR on the 20th of December. And we know that in relation to that, I'm not going to bring up all the records in relation to this, but we know that Scott Morgan updated social care as to his discussions with AR and noted that AR was currently on the ASC pathway. Have you seen any records from the community paediatrics side of things suggesting that CAMS generally, or Mr. Morgan in particular, contacted the autism service to say anything about AR?
No, I haven't.
And while Acorn's school had put the autism service on notice of their concerns, would you expected there to have been some communication between CAMS and the autism service, given the extent to which CAMS were involved, going to meetings with Prevent, for example?
Yes, I would. Yes.
And we're going to be exploring with other witnesses the fact that going into 2020, there were two meetings at which forensic cams were involved, and assessments by forensic cams about risk and comment upon the risk, but in particular indicating that there was a limit to how much FCAMs could say until there was a diagnosis. Dealing with that stage, which is February and March 2020, is there any indication on the autism service records of a chaser or a request for prioritization coming in from other agencies saying, effectively, AR is on your pathway for diagnosis, but there's a lot going on. Can you give him prioritization? Can you hurry up? Can you tell us what the outcome is?
Yeah,
Just pause for a moment. Thank you.
No, I haven't been able to locate that information in the record.
And so if it is a fair summary of what was going on with other agencies, that there was discussion of the risk that AR may pose to others and concern about that, and that autism and his diagnosis of autism had not yet been made but was potentially significant to how this was all going to be handled. Is it right that from the investigations that you have done, those agencies didn't communicate that to the autism service at all?
Yes, that's how it seems. Yes, correct.
Thank you. In your statement, you go on helpfully to track through the chronology. So you tell us in paragraph 20, low down on the same page, about the telephone appointment that did then take place on the 2nd of July. And who was that with, first of all? Who was the clinician?
It was Dr. Acharya, who was a locum consultant paediatrician at the time.
Thank you. And I don't think AR was involved in that in person. Was it his father?
Yes, it was.
Who provided the information on that occasion? And you deal with it in paragraph 20. What was the upshot of that consultation and what was covered by it?
It appears that the focus of that appointment was around social communication differences and how we presented sort of rigid thinking. So Dr. Acharya decided to focus on autism diagnostic assessment. There didn't seem to be much exploration regarding ADHD assessment at that time. So her outcome was to place him on the autism pathway, which then obviously was becoming independent.
Thank you. So in very simplistic terms, would it be right that there was enough concerns, even though AR wasn't present personally, enough concerns from the history and information provided by Alfonso, AR's father, to convince Dr. Acharya that AR was suitable for further assessment along the autism pathway?
Yes, that's correct.
You explain in paragraph 21, and you've touched upon it, that you're unable to understand fully why Dr. Acharya did not discuss ADHD symptoms further on that occasion. Is that right?
Yes, yeah.
And I'm concentrating at the moment on the autism timings, but given that concerns have been raised about autism and ADHD, would you agree that on the face of it appears to be something of an omission? You would have expected ADHD to have been traversed at that meeting?
Yes, because it was the reason for referral. It was requesting both assessments. So I would expect that to have been explored in a bit more detail. Yeah.
Thank you. So for your note, AHCH 4096. So I think the clinic letter arising out of that first assessment.
Thank you very much.
And then paragraphs 23 to 24 on page 6, so a little bit further down the page, Sarah, you explain that in the ongoing process, AR was then assessed by a speech and language therapist on the 28th of August 2020, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And there was a report for that issued, I think, on the 27th of October, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So AHCH 4096 at pages 4 to 5, but we don't need to turn it up. And then paragraph 25 on page 7, again in the chronology, you explain that on the 17th of November 2020, there was then a telephone appointment with AR's father, and this was being conducted by telephone, and it was with Kate Murphy, who was a neurodevelopmental practitioner and registered nurse. Yes?
Yes, that's correct.
And what would the purpose of that consultation have been?
So the purpose of the neurodevelopmental history assessment is it's part of NICE guidance for us to explore all of the history of a young person. So the conversation would have been around birth history, sort of pregnancy, all the way through developmental milestones, how they were met, if there was any delays. Then we would talk about school history, nursery history, and then obviously focus on the social communication differences that may have been seen in terms of his play skills, interaction with others, sort of making friends. So it's quite a comprehensive assessment which focuses on the DSM criteria for autism spectrum disorder to get that information from parents. Yeah.
AR, I think, by that date would have been 14.
Yes.
Would that be the expectation that this was parents, in this case father, doing that, or would you expect, if they were willing and consenting, the patient themselves?
Yes, so primarily the history is usually from parents or main caregivers, because we're asking about, you know, very early history when the young person maybe couldn't remember that. But in some circumstances, some young people do want to be involved, and, you know, that is optional, but it wouldn't be a requirement for us to be able to get that detailed history, because we always do an appointment with the young person as well. And obviously he'd had his appointment with the speech therapist, so we felt that we'd got his views in that sense. But it is optional for young people to attend, especially at the age of 14, if they wish to.
Thank you. Now, rising out of that, those two core assessments have been done, and you tell us in paragraph 26 that what happens next is there's the multidisciplinary panel meeting that we touched on earlier in your evidence. And I think in AR's case that took place on the 30th of December 2020. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
With Dr. Sultan, a consultant paediatrician, Ruth Mitchell, a highly specialist speech and language therapist, and Dawn Devine, a physician associate. They were the ones making up the panel, is that right?
That's correct.
So we don't need to turn it up, but AHCH 30100 at pages 35 to 36 is the record of that meeting. Now, in terms of the basic outcome of that, you explain at the end of paragraph 27 that the panel concluded that further assessment of potential ADHD symptoms was warranted, but they found that AR met the diagnostic criteria for autism.
Yes, that's correct.
I want to ask you about the information about risk and behaviours that was known by that time, and whether it was taken into account. So there'd been a strategy meeting in December 2019. There'd also been the involvement of FCAMs in the first 3 months of 2020. There'd been information about AR carrying knives 10 times to school, that's October 2019, telling a policeman that he was pretty certain he would have used the knife, There was information that was available in relation to getting a detention and making a comment about that's why teachers are murdered. There was a case of a fight with another pupil. There's then the hockey stick incident on the 11th of December, and information, taking it fairly shortly, about inappropriate interests on the internet, violence, school shootings, and an interest in graphic imagery. Would all of those things have been relevant, first of all, to that multidisciplinary panel meeting?
Yes, it would have, yes.
From the records, do you think that that information was in fact available to the panel?
It was available. It would have been on the record. However, I think as discussed yesterday, the records are quite hard to follow, and you would have had to really look to find the actual CAMS risk assessment that was completed. However, the school report that we received from Acorn School, so as part of autism diagnostic process, we have to request school information as part of that multi-agency assessment, and they actually provided a very comprehensive report which included a chronology of risk as well. So I assume that the panel would have been able to review all of that and use the information to help with the conclusion, because it was quite evident that there was, highly expressed interests that were evident within that report.
All right, so just unpicking that a little bit.
Yeah.
Should we understand that so far as the autism service side of Meditech is concerned, there wasn't a distillation of all of that risk information on the autism service Meditech records?
Sorry, say that again.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
It was a bad question. I'm picturing at the moment, in terms of the electronic systems, that both the autism service and CAMS are using the same electronic patient records, but they are keeping their own records, yes?
Yes, that's correct.
There was, as we were exploring yesterday, there was a lot of risk information was in fact recorded in different places, in different ways, in the CAMS electronic records.
Yes, that's correct.
From your review of the autism service records, had anybody extracted that information from the CAMS side of the records and distilled it into the autism service records?
Not in that way, no, yeah.
And can you see from the minutes of the multidisciplinary panel any evidence that they had in fact gone to the CAMS record and pulled lots of information about risk out of the CAMS records?
I'd have to look at it again. I'm sorry. The minutes for that meeting, but I can't remember exactly whether they did mention any risk. But I would hope that they did read some of it, but I don't know how much detail they went into.
Right. But what you do tell us is that the Acorns, not the original emails that we were looking at, but the detailed report that they provided did refer in some detail to a chronology of risks and concerns.
Yeah, that would have been available, yes.
Thank you. Could we just see AHCH 30s 100? And could we try page 35? Have I correctly identified the MDP record?
Yeah, that's correct.
So I'm not going to read it all out, but perhaps, Sarah, could you just enlarge from assessment down to the bottom of the page?
So this was from Acorns?
Sorry, no, this is minutes of the meeting that was held. So this is the multidisciplinary meeting with Dr. Sultan and speech therapy and physician associate, where they've reviewed the records, and it's clear that they have looked at the school information because they've mentioned details there about what school have said. So yeah.
Yeah.
And I think as well, just above, they do mention what they've read in this meeting as well, and school information is highlighted there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll just go over the page because I know it continues on page 36, please.
Yeah.
So does that look like to you that they were relying on the school report rather
Yeah.
than any detailed information distilled out of CAMS?
Yes, usually if they have reviewed any CAMS notes or reports, they would list that in the section that says reports viewed,
Yeah.
which is on the previous page.
So if we go to
And
page 35,
it
back to
does-
page 35.
It doesn't appear assessments comprised of, it doesn't appear that they've reviewed CAMS notes, no.
Yeah. But the educational psychology report, school information report, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
So although, fortunately, the school information helped to provide some details in relation to this, would you agree that a shortcoming in relation to the information that was being provided was there was a lot of relevant information on the CAM system that doesn't seem to have been distilled for the multidisciplinary panel?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. That can come down from the screen. We'll come on in just a moment to look at what happens hereafter. But in high level, it's right, isn't it, that having conveyed the diagnosis to AR's family, the referral was then closed to the autism service, no doubt because it was diagnostic, as we explored earlier on. Would that be fair in high-level summary?
Yes, that's correct.
If the service had been aware of all of that information about risk, would the case have remained open to the autism service, do you think?
No, it would not.
And why is that?
Because the service was solely commissioned for diagnostic support, so our role would have been to ensure that services were in place to carry on that support and manage that risk, but it wouldn't have been the responsibility of the actual assessment team.
I'm asked to explore with you quite a bit of further information about aspects of AR's behaviour and his family dynamics. I'm going to take this relatively shortly, but there is information in respect of AR and how he was dealing with other agencies that suggests that he was minimising his own actions, so the seriousness of his assaults, that he was at times evasive, unwilling to take responsibility, that he'd shown signs of dishonesty, that he was argumentative, he was driven by a perception of grievance, that he lacked reflection, that he lacked remorse, he lacked empathy in relation to mental health clinicians, that he, if not manipulating, was trying to lead the conversations to get particular medication. Would all of that have been relevant to the multidisciplinary panel?
I think it just really explains why he met the criteria for autism diagnosis, really, because a lot of what you're describing, you know, he did have highly fixated interests. He would often research into things, which at times was obviously medication and things. So that was part of his condition. I think we also noticed that, you know, in the education psychology report, they highlighted that there was concerns around his emotional understanding and expression of emotions. So he actually really struggled to understand what empathy is and how other people feel in different situations. I think the speech language therapist as well noticed that he often misinterpreted facial expressions. He didn't understand what people meant. He often perceived tone of voice incorrectly. So I think everything you described there is part of a neurodivergent profile, that he obviously had significant difficulties in relation to his autism diagnosis. Yeah.
So consistent with that which was already known and being assessed, would that be fair?
Yes, that's correct.
But presumably, in the ideal world, that information about how AR was engaging would also have been made available to the panel. It would have been helpful additional information.
Yeah, it would, yeah.
But should we take it from your evidence that the effect of that, so far as autism is concerned, is that it would simply have reinforced the picture that the panel already had?
Yes, that's correct.
And we don't see, again, I'm not going to go to lots of records to prove a negative, but I think you would agree that we don't see from the multidisciplinary panel or the autism service records from around that time any readout from the process to say, in addition to the autism diagnosis, there's a serious concern about risk or risk to others, that the risk factors don't seem to be part of what the diagnostic service was looking at. Would you agree?
Yes, that's correct.
And is it too much of a simplification for me to suggest that the reason for that is that the autism service would have been expecting others to deal with that?
Yes, that's correct.
If the panel had been aware that there was a diagnosis of conduct disorder, and there wasn't, so it's a hypothetical, but would that have made any difference?
No. I mean, there may have been some additional recommendations added to the report, but very similar recommendations in terms of like parent support, accessing services, etc.
We have seen, and I'm going to come back to FCAMS a little later, but we've seen from the FCAMS input in March 2020 an indication that a diagnosis of autism could complicate the risk assessment in a number of ways, and that for some with autism, features associated with autism, particularly fixation on certain interests, can lead to an increased risk to others. In general terms, would you agree with that?
Yes, I would.
And it might be thought that for AR, the fact that he was now diagnosed with autism, together with all of the risk information, meant that there was now that confirmed increase of risk. Did the autism service have any part to play in noticing that in the first place and then doing anything about it?
I think obviously risk management is everyone's responsibility, and I do accept that. However, I think the autism team's direct responsibility would be to ensure that the right services were in place. And I know we'll probably come on to it, but I think in the feedback discussion with father and the concerns, we did escalate. The autism team escalated to CAMS and ensured that an appointment was booked to carry on that intervention and support. So that would be our responsibility in terms of making sure that a service was involved to manage that risk.
Thank you. So I'm coming on to how the diagnosis was conveyed to AR and his family. Would that be a convenient moment?
It would. I'll sit again at past.
Thanks, sir. Ms. Bogan, let's turn then to how the multidisciplinary panel's diagnosis was conveyed. You tell us in paragraphs 28 and 29 of your statement. Page 7, please, Sarah. So just refresh your memory of paragraph 28 at the bottom of the page. And then 29. I think initially it was by telephone that AR's father was informed on is the date the 20th of January 2021?
Yes, that's correct.
And Alfonso was concerned about how AR would take the diagnosis. And was that because AR didn't himself accept that he had autism at that stage?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
And I think it was against that background that there was an agreement to have a feedback meeting on the 3rd of February, top of page 9 of your statement, paragraph 33, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So again, we remind ourselves, obviously, of the COVID context, and that, I think, was done by video call with AR and his father present, and that was when you did have a direct involvement yourself.
Yeah, it was.
And so how would that meeting have been run? Just give us the feel of it and the headlines from it.
So within the meetings, we would go through with the young person all of the information that we've gathered and all of the different people that have been involved in the assessment. So we would just revisit that with him and we would have explained sort of, you know, why we're trying to elicit the information and just reminded him of that. And then we would have tried to frame it in a positive way for him because I think he had quite negative connotations regarding what autism was at that time. So we tried to frame it in a really neuroaffirmative way, that it's just a profile of needs. It means that he thinks differently to everyone else and he may have some differences from his neurotypical peers. And we just tried to explain that by understanding his differences, it would enable him to get further support and help in school and things like that. So we would have gone through all of the diagnostic criteria and how we met that and the difficulties that we had seen. And then we would have spent a lot of time explaining, you know, that the diagnosis had been given and that it had been confirmed. And then we would have spent time talking about him, about what support is available after, if he wished to engage with that, and his parents as well, what they can access in terms of signposting.
Now, you've explained in the course of that answer, and you set out in your statement, that an intention here would be to be neuroaffirmative.
Yes, that's correct.
And not least because of a degree of non-acceptance by AR conveyed by his father, you would have no doubt aimed for this to be a supportive session, yes?
Yeah, we would have.
Which would have been seeking to start the process of AR understanding the diagnosis.
Yeah, we really would have spent time trying to help him understand and gain some insight into the difficulties that he might have been experiencing and not really understanding what that was. So we were able to give it a name for him and explain that the challenges was because of his autism, and go through that with him and help him to sort of understand a little bit more about himself.
And in my layperson's terms, emphasising that the diagnosis meant simply that he would process and look at some things differently compared to his neurotypical peers.
Yes, that's
that
correct.
Doesn't equate to less valuable or wrong matters of that kind. It just means that there are some differences which may need to be addressed in various different ways.
Yeah, that's correct.
Now, realistically, against that background, in fairness to you, this would not have been the time to bring into play concerns about what he might have been looking at online in terms of what you refer to as spending considerable time on intense interests in paragraph 34, because this was one where, in layperson's terms, you wanted to get him on board and keep him on board.
Yes, that's correct.
But were you at this stage personally aware of that risk information that I've summarised?
Yes, I was aware that there was some incidents where he'd harmed other people, and I think we I think that was why we went around it so sensitively in terms of how we delivered the news. I think father's concerns were mainly around, his emotional well-being, but obviously there was that risk which had been evident in the school reports that we'd received. So we needed to be careful and ensure that he was, and in the best way that we could, try to support him to understand that without causing a negative reaction.
And while understanding that this would not have been the time to do anything that might have been perceived by AR or indeed his father as confrontational or challenging his behaviours and that risk information of concern, did you yourself do anything outside of the meeting, perhaps with other agencies, to check that that was being taken forward?
Yes, so following on from the conversation with father, he was very keen for CAM's involvement to remain, to be able to address some of the difficulties that they were experiencing. And I think father at the time felt, he thought that the case had been closed to CAMS. So I agreed that I would look into that for him, and I asked him to email me with some more details about what he was struggling with at home. I think to give him an opportunity to be more open and honest about what was happening without obviously AR being present. And he did email me, and following that I then had a conversation with the CAMS manager as I had reviewed the case and could see that on the actual system the case was still open to CAMS, and it hadn't actually been discharged. So I asked for a review appointment to be arranged so that support could be embedded and in place. And obviously at that time there was some other services I think that were involved as well in the background. So I mean, in my view, I suppose I did hand over that responsibility to the CAMS service to pick that up.
And
yeah,
that was in terms of Alphonse R. I think wanting himself to ensure that there was further CAMS involvement, and you've indicated how you've passed that on. But more specifically, did you include within that a concern about, well, now we have a diagnosis of autism confirmed for this particular pupil, given the risk information that we're aware of, this does rather cement concerns around risk. So we do need to be careful about internet use and matters of that kind. Were you emphasising those aspects?
I can't remember if I did say that specifically, unfortunately. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not sure about that.
Again, do you think that might have been an appropriate thing to do?
Yes, it would have.
You've touched on the request from Alphonse, and I think he requested in addition that there be an ADHD assessment, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
And in terms of the way in which this was now being taken forward by the Autism Service, I think there would have been a final report that you touch on in your statement, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And you agreed, I think, that the final report should be amended to reflect the request for an ADHD assessment?
Yes, that's correct.
And a recommendation within that AR's school should refer AR to the ADHD team for assessment?
Yes, that's correct.
The matter that you touched on a moment ago, you deal with in paragraph 41 of your statement. That's the request by him for CAMS involvement, further CAMS involvement, including ADHD being necessary. It's paragraph 41 on page 10. You also go on to explain in paragraph 41 that you explain the referral process for ADHD. Now, I think by this stage, the requirements had slightly changed. Can you just explain to us what the change was?
Yes, so ADHD service at the time, they expected school to complete the referral in partnership with parents. The reason for that is that NICE guidance in terms of assessment for ADHD means that there needs to be clear evidence of difficulties in 2 domains. So what that means is 2 settings, usually school and home for young people. So when a referral is completed in partnership with school and parents, then the assessment can go forward, quite quickly because that information is available. And I explained that to Alphonse.
So, putting it bluntly, it wasn't going to be enough for Alphonse, as Eyal's father, just to say, I have concerns about ADHD and raise it with CAMHS and ask for a referral. There was going to have to be a referral coming in for 2 sources to get through the gateway.
Yes, that's correct.
And you think you explained that?
Yes.
Paragraph 43 over the page, please, Sarah. The final outcome report initially, I think, was dated the 12th of February, so AHCH 4096 at page 10, but we don't need to turn it up. But I think you reviewed it and you spotted it that aspect in relation to the school being asked to complete ADHD hadn't in fact been added. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And so it was amended, as you've explained, and the final one we'll see is dated the 16th of February 2021. So for your note, LCC 4097, the final report including that recommendation that the school be invited to consider a referral. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
You explain that upon reviewing the records, and I think in context that's you reviewing the records, sorry, I think we've just moved away from the relevant paragraph that we were on previously. Yeah, paragraph 43. Upon reviewing the records, and I think in the context that's you reviewing the records for the purposes of your evidence to this inquiry.
Yes.
Not at the time. Yeah.
Yes.
I note that this report does not appear to have been copied to the school as you requested, and as a result you're unable to comment on whether the school received the request to initiate ADHD referral.
Yes, that's correct.
And does that appear to be an error at the autism service end, that wasn't done as you'd intended?
Yeah, unfortunately at the time our letter system was quite different, so clinicians would email letters to administrators to then upload onto the system. So obviously you're relying on, information to be passed over and etc. Whereas that's now been corrected, and that obviously is not how we work now, but at the time that was the method that was used to send the report to an administrator to then upload and do the copies.
Yeah, and although one understands why you give us the detail about the systems then and the systems now, it's not unimportant because the system had changed, requiring 2 points of referral. You as the clinician were supportive of this, and the letter was intended to be the request or the nudge to the school to make their side of the referral. So it's not an insignificant failure, is it, if the letter didn't ever go to the school? Would you agree?
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you. In terms of the overall time taken to diagnose AR with autism, we've looked at the early period and you've accepted that there seems to be a shortcoming there. The total period we calculate to be 77 weeks, I think,
Yes.
from referral to diagnosis. How does that compare to national averages or national standards for the time?
I think at the time it was in comparison. There are significant challenges in terms of diagnostic services across the whole of the nation, and waiting times are unfortunately significantly longer than what we would like. So at the time it was, we know that waiting times are over 12 months in a lot of areas, unfortunately. this is obviously not what we want, but that was sort of a national picture and still is, unfortunately.
But within that initial period of some 8 months or so, from November, which would have been the 11-week average, to July, that was a period of delay by Alder Hay's own standards. Would you agree?
Yes, I think the KPI targets for community paediatrics at the moment is 18 weeks. So obviously I think it did go over that time, the first appointment.
I appreciate that it is difficult, but are you able to assist the inquiry as to the impact that period of time, the 77 weeks, of which 8 months was in excess of the 11 weeks for the first appointment? Are you able to assist us with whether that period of time or delay would have had an impact on AR?
I would say, yeah. I mean, I'll be honest and say that I feel autism diagnosis is important in terms of formulation and care planning and how treatment can be implemented, if that makes sense. So obviously AR was involved with CAMS, but he had significant difficulties engaging with that process. So a diagnosis of autism would have maybe informed practitioners to use approaches that were more suitable for an autistic young person, sort of adapted approaches. They may have been able to engage him in a different way, maybe using electronic means or text messaging or things like that. So yeah, I would say that the delay was significant, especially in terms of the forensic CAMS report, which I obviously wasn't aware of as it wasn't on the record, but that obviously seems to be heavily weighted towards having a diagnosis of autism and that being completed quickly, which impacted on the risk assessment. I think that they recommended not being completed. So yeah, I think in summary I would say yes, it is important. The wait was too long, unfortunately.
So one aspect of that you've been candidly accepting there is the impact on those who are trying to help AR, to some extent because they may have known that autism might have been in play. They may have been able to use some of those strategies anyway, but you're accepting that there's that impact. In terms of AR himself, would this be right? As a neurodivergent condition, his autism wouldn't, in any sense, have been made worse by the delay because it's not, in inverted commas, treatable?
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
But would it be fair to say that a delay can have an effect on the young person concerned because there's a risk of entrenchment of the difficulty? So in areas like social communication, emotional regulation, behavioural flexibility, sensory processing, there's a delay in addressing those issues. So although the autism doesn't get worse, it can have a detrimental effect, a delayed diagnosis, on the individual. Yeah,
that's correct. Research does support that delayed diagnosis can have an impact. I think especially AR's schooling situation, unfortunately, he's struggling to access school. So an autism diagnosis may have informed sort of the planning around his education provision a little bit earlier.
And for ADHD, a delay in diagnosis there, would you agree, could reinforce maladaptive neural pathways? So slightly different with ADHD, that the actual condition could worsen because maladaptive pathways can become stronger?
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you. In terms of the support that was then offered, you indicate in your statement that there would have been the provision of signposting to the community sector organisations that would be able to provide support. And you've touched in general terms upon those. In relation to the monitoring of whether they were taken up, is any monitoring done, or is it effectively left to the parents to ensure that they take up appropriate support?
Yes, so there wouldn't be any monitoring from the diagnostic service, so we wouldn't have oversight on whether services were taken up. As I said earlier on, autism spectrum disorder is quite a unique profile of difficulties, and everyone is different. Therefore, some young people may have difficulties maybe in attention or sensory differences, where others may have difficulties in other areas. So the services are available as sort of like a menu of support, really, which parents can then access to look at specific, concerns that they may have with the young person or child. So we very much hope and we support parents to be their own advocates in that way and explain that they need to, research and find out about autism. And we always say for them to attend as many courses as possible just to get that awareness and that insight into the autism spectrum and what that means. So so we would very much expect parents and the young person themselves to try and access all of that support.
Support parents to be their own advocates.
Yes.
You'll forgive me, but I'm sure it's right that it is done in a supportive way and an informative way to tell parents of the sources of support. But is the blunt reality of support parents to be their own advocates that you give them the information in a supportive way and say, here's the menu, but the autism service at the time stepped away having done that?
Yes, because we are only part of the diagnostic process. We wouldn't have capacity, unfortunately, to follow up in that way.
And so if parents were thereafter struggling to get that support, and I'm not here referring to anything specific in relation to as parents, but were ineffective as parents in getting the support, is there any autism service in the local healthcare area who are there to help them post-diagnosis at the time?
There is, but again, it's not statutory, so it would be parents seeking that out.
From whom? Who would they turn to?
So there was the small service that I mentioned earlier, the Sefton nursing ASD and ADHD team. There is a small service that can offer some treatment, well, not treatment, it's some intervention. So that would be some parent training and maybe some individual work with the young person if that was required. But that would again still need to be sought out by parents.
In a case such as AR's, where there was all this risk information of concern, is that process sufficient?
Sorry, can you clarify?
Is signposting parents on to support for autism and then letting the parents advocate for themselves about that, is that sufficient, do you think, in a case in which there's lots of information of concern about risk to others?
I think in his case, though, he was open to the CAMS services. So from our perspective as an autism diagnostic service, he was already open to a service that has a responsibility for managing risk. So the information was on the system and had been shared with parents. CAMS were able to access the information. And I think it's quite clear, when I reviewed the records, that CAMS did talk about the same signposting that we'd given, throughout that journey. So they did have another agency involved at that time.
Right. So because of the resource, what the autism service was resourced and not resourced to do at the time, the baton then gets handed back to CAMS, does it, to ensure that interventions that are now taking place against the background of the autism diagnosis are sufficient to deal with the risk to others?
I think that would depend on a lot of factors. So obviously, with AR's case, there was concerns around anxiety, isolation, socialisation. So mental health was considered, as a possibility that he was struggling with mental health as a comorbid factor. So CAMS obviously is important in that sense, but if it was another scenario, for example, where there might be, domestic violence or something, or maybe mental health wasn't a factor, then we would refer on to social care or early help, for example.
Understand, but
yeah.
I'm focusing on the cases, including ARs, where the concern is not that the child may come to harm, and is not as such that the child may have a mental health condition such as an anxiety disorder, but that the behaviour of the child, now worsened because of a confirmed autism diagnosis, is a risk to the lives of other people. And you'll understand it's not a criticism of you individually, but I come back to the fact that the autism service wasn't resourced or expected to give ongoing support in that case. Notwithstanding the concerns about risk to others, the baton was passed back to another agency here, so far as you were concerned, CAMS.
Yeah, that's correct.
And you deal in your statement with the subsequent decision to discharge AR, presumably for the reasons that we've just been covering from the autism service. There's a particular point that I want to pick up with you about discharge, because you've explained the reasoning and the resourcing of the autism service, what it was expected to do. But we do have on the records that indication from forensic CAMS from back in March 2020 of an offer for them to become further involved if there was a significant change, and an indication that their ability to input into the risk was limited by the fact that there had not yet been a diagnosis. So against that background, prior to the AR being discharged from the autism service, wouldn't it have been appropriate for the autism service to refer AR back to FCAMS?
Yeah, so unfortunately, as far as I can see, we didn't receive any communication with FCAMS prior. So as discussed earlier, they didn't ask us to expedite or contact in any way, giving us that information. And as discussed yesterday, unfortunately, the FCAMS reports that have been submitted, so 2 letters, were actually never on the record. So I and the rest of my team wouldn't have known that that recommendation was even made, unfortunately.
Had you known that that was made, would you have referred AR back to FCAMS?
Yes.
Being, it seems, for reasons beyond the Autism Service's control, ignorant of that at the time, would you have expected CAMS, who were aware of the diagnosis, to re-refer to FCAMS?
Yes, yes.
Do you know why that wasn't done?
I would assume for the same reasons, really, that the report was not clear on the record. So there was a note which was very brief saying that FCAMS had had previous involvement but closed the case. Obviously, this was from my review following my involvement. But that report wasn't really even available when I was doing my full review of the case. So I would imagine that the CAMHS practitioner who came in to support after the autism diagnosis, when she had her appointment, she probably would have been in the same scenario as we were, that it wasn't clear that that recommendation had ever been made, unfortunately. But that would be obviously just me thinking what may have happened.
So from your understanding of the record, Sam Steed, who I think it would have been at that side, was blindsided like you?
Yeah, I'm guessing so, unfortunately, yes.
Thank you. Before we come on to the ADHD side, we just come back to the question of risk assessments. I said that I would come back to page 16, paragraph 62 of your statement. I've explored with you, that could just come up on screen, please, Sarah, paragraph 62, thank you. I've explored with you the autism service involvement in risk assessment, but having been asked about autism services role in the assessment of risk, you volunteered some comments about the CAMHS assessment of risk. I read the first two lines earlier on, but you went on to say that review of the records confirms that risk assessments completed by clinicians within the CAMHS service were, your words, comprehensive and included AR's history of incidents involving violence and threats, as well as reference to his autism diagnosis as a factor in his emotional dysregulation. Is that quite accurate?
No, it isn't. So I think at the time of my review, I was looking obviously from the autism diagnostic team's perspective. So for us as a diagnostic team, the risk assessment did have details in that we could use to support the assessment to go ahead. I think that's probably what I've meant, but following obviously the evidence and the Alder Hey internal review that has been conducted, it's clear, with further scrutiny that the standard operating procedure was not followed and the risk assessment was not reviewed at the intervals that it should have been, and details were missing. So now, obviously, that I understand that further information, I would say that is not true, and I would, want to amend that to say that unfortunately it wasn't comprehensive, and should have been more detailed.
Please don't go into any question of any legal advice that you had in the course of your preparing your statement, all right? Because I don't wish to ask about that, and I have no right to ask about it. But was that expression that you volunteered, that the risk assessments within the CAMHS service were comprehensive? Was that your own personal reflection, having looked at the notes, or was that an indication from Alder Hey as a trust of how they wanted to present matters?
I think, honestly, I answered the questions that were given to me in the Rule 9. The Rule 9 question, was something like, what was my view of the CAMHS risk assessment? Yeah. So I think I've just answered that as honestly as I did at the time. So that is my own view based on, I think, my experience in the diagnostic service, looking at it from that maybe narrow perspective. But no one has told me to write anything at all. That was my own view at the time. But obviously now I feel differently about that. Yeah.
Right. So that was a personal reflection by you, one that you now, my words, accept perhaps as a little rose tinted.
Yes, yeah.
I follow, thank you. Can we turn then to deal with the ADHD assessment process? And we've touched on aspects of this while looking at autism, so I'll try to deal with it relatively more briefly. But we've seen, haven't we, that the initial referral in was in relation to both autism and ADHD?
Yes, that's correct.
And we've traversed how you wanted the final report to cover the need for a referral from the school for ADHD on the background of the fact that the multidisciplinary panel had indicated that further assessment for ADHD would be warranted.
Yes.
Is that a fair summary?
Yes.
Could we look at paragraph 44 of your statement, please? It's on page 11. You deal, coming back then to matters after February as how things went forward. So we've looked at the autism diagnosis. A couple of months after that, you say that upon reviewing the clinical records, you can confirm that Sam Steed met with AR and his father during the CAMS appointment, 9th of April 21, and that AR's father explained that he'd requested a referral to the ADHD service for assessment and that AR was currently on the waiting list. You say, I'm unable to comment on whether Ms. Steed checked the records at that time to confirm if an ADHD referral was active on the system. But you say it's possible that given the referral process has changed, that Ms. Steed noted the active community paediatrics referral and concluded that the community paediatricians were in the process of considering an ADHD diagnostic assessment. You make clear, helpfully, that that's a supposition on your part. We just make sure that I've understood that correctly. Are you saying that there was a risk there that Mr. Steed may have been able to see that the community paediatrics part of the referral was there, may not have been aware that now it would need the school ones too, so that in simplistic terms she may have been lulled into thinking this is all on train?
Yeah, that was my recollection when I read it. It was a little bit confusing at that time during that transition period. So she may have seen that referral open on the system and thought that it was in hand and that she didn't need to take any further action.
You go on in paragraph 49 of your statement to deal with the fact that in the context of a meeting with Dr. Sultan in July 2021, there's no indication that the family raised ADHD at that stage. Is that right?
Yeah, within the records and the notes for that appointment, I didn't see any discussion around ADHD from AR or his father. It wasn't documented. Yeah.
Understanding that that's the case, and we think that you're right, that it's not documented that that was specifically raised, but it's entirely possible, indeed perhaps likely, isn't it, that Alfonso at that stage would have just thought that AR was on the waiting list?
Yeah, that's correct.
And would it be fair that you can't read too much into it not being specifically raised on that occasion, in particular, given the April conversation with Miss Steed, where he may have got the impression that he was on the waiting list?
Yeah, that's correct.
Could we look, please, at the bottom half of paragraph 49? You say that the ASD and the ADHD diagnostic services have been restructured to operate independently from the community paediatric service at this time. And you've helped us with that. But you then say, in my opinion, further justifying the case closure to the community paediatrics department at that time. I'm not quite sure that I follow the logic of that. Given that the ADH assessment was outstanding.
So I think what I meant by that is the community paediatrics department then had a very clear remit around what they would deliver, which was regarding neurodisability, so physical health issues, medical issues, children with complex health needs, for example, Down syndrome, neurofibromatosis, cerebral palsy. So their criteria in July 2021 was specific around health. So AR would, if it had been now, and obviously I know it isn't, but he probably wouldn't meet criteria for that service at all. So I think, this again is just supposition. that maybe the paediatrician had looked and realised that, you know, there was no health issues, so they closed the case. But unfortunately, obviously, the missing piece was the ADHD assessment, because that referral was obviously not open to ADHD at that time.
As you go on to deal in paragraph 50, it's not the case that Alphonse R had somehow accepted that ADHD was no longer relevant, because as you correctly and fairly point out in paragraph 50, he raised the ADHD issue again with Dr. Elaine Weir, who was involved on the I think on the dietitian side at this stage, as a general paediatrician. Yes.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
And as a result of that, Dr. Weir requested that either the GP or CAMS investigate the concerns over ADHD and initiate an ADHD assessment. Yes.
Yeah, that's correct.
So that letter is AHCH 4096 at pages 27 to 28. And that was copied to GP and to Dr. Molyneux as the psychiatrist at that time. What happened to that?
I think as I've added, really, I wasn't able to identify whether any action was taken following that letter being sent. Because, as I've added later on, the referral that was eventually, you know, that did come in for ADHD was from school.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if there was any liaison. There may have been, but it just wasn't in the notes. But that eventually did come in June 23.
All right, so that's paragraph 51, and that's Pressfield School
Yes.
making the referral, yes?
Yeah, that's correct.
In general terms, I think you explain in your statement that there were parts of that referral where there wasn't the level of information that would be expected.
Yeah, that's correct.
And you explain that the assessment of that, paragraph 52, was done by Donna Hampson. Who was she?
She is an ADHD nurse specialist within the ADHD team.
And we see from your paragraph 52 that she rejected it on the 5th of February 2024. What were the reasons for the rejection?
So in her letter back, she just explained that there wasn't sufficient evidence from both home and school to show significant differences in attention hyperactivity or impulse control. So I think she'd seen that there were gaps in the information and felt that it wasn't, it didn't, you know, it couldn't be accepted.
Yeah. But you go on to say that you're unable to comment on whether she reviewed the full medical record as part of the decision-making process. But you say it's evident from the referral form that Ms. Dawson did not include any examples of evidence of previous risk-related incidents involving AR.
Yes.
Do you actually mean by that there was relevant evidence available on the records to which Ms. Dawson did not refer in her rejection?
I think, as I've explained, so our record is obviously a whole holistic record. So ADHD service would have been able to see CAMS notes. You know, they would have been able to see that. Unfortunately, you know, the triage, allocated time, the resources that we have, whether she would have been able to review everything in that session. Obviously, I'm not sure, but I don't think she, you know, it wouldn't be standard practice. And also the referral form itself, I think what I mean is the actual ADHD referral form, which was different than the paediatric one, which I explained earlier, had questions specifically around ADHD signs and symptoms, but within that referral form there wasn't actually a section to add any risk information. So the teacher would have just filled that in and sent it without adding additional information that may have been helpful. So she may just not have seen that there was any risk presented, but again, that's just a supposition. I
understand a degree of reluctance to criticise and perhaps unfairly criticise Ms. Hampson, but Does it really come to this, that you, with all of your expertise looking at this and knowing what's in the notes, can now see that there was earlier information that would go to ADHD and a suspicion of ADHD that doesn't seem to have been averted to in the rejection?
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
And do you think, looking at it appropriately, critically, in terms of identifying lessons learned, do you think that sufficient consideration was given by the ADHD service at this stage to the fact that AR was barely attending Pressfield School, so that the school referral was inevitably going to struggle with providing detailed information?
Yeah, I think I did review the standard operating procedure for the ADHD service at that time, which has now been archived, but that actually did not have any risk consideration within it, unfortunately. So she's obviously followed the standard operational process as it was without that consideration of risk, which in my view is an oversight, and that is something that we've worked really hard to correct since this happened. So
with your knowledge of the case papers, and it's unfair perhaps to make that as a direct comparison with Miss Hampson, and I'm not raising this as a criticism of Miss Hampson, I want to be clear about that, but with your wider knowledge of what's in the case papers, do you think that a referral on in the ADHD system would have been appropriate at that time if the information had been brought properly together?
I do think it was appropriate to assess for ADHD,
Yep.
yes.
I think you say in your statement you can't say what would have come out of that,
Yeah.
but you think that putting the information together that was available, in fact, AR should have been gone through to a full assessment for ADHD.
Yes, that's correct.
You deal with, in your statement, with the fact that it's, perhaps we should look at it, paragraph 79. Page 21, please, Sarah. You say, as you're not currently a practicing nurse prescriber, you don't feel it would be appropriate for you to comment on whether AR would have been prescribed ADHD treatment if he had received a confirmed diagnosis. I think what you're pointing out there is that AR had risks relating to dietary restrictions and periods of notable weight loss, and that stimulant medications, the first-line treatment for ADHD, are known to have side effects such as suppressing appetite, which can lead to further weight loss. I think you were there saying that although you can't say definitively, you're flagging up to the inquiry, are you not, that there may have been some contraindications to medication in AR's individual case?
Yeah, I think I was asked to describe what would happen if he had have received an ADHD diagnosis. So I just wanted to make the inquiry aware that it would have been quite complex to be able to prescribe for AR due to physical health limitations, involvement with dietetic services and things. So it just would have been, there would have had to be comprehensive reviews to look at it really, and obviously unsure whether he would have met criteria or not, but I just wanted to give some information in regard to that.
Thank you. Just bringing this topic of my questioning to a close, I think 5 opportunities can be identified where the ADHD process was at least suboptimal. First, on the 2nd of July 2020, that's Dr. Achara, who took forward autism, but not, it seems, questioning about ADHD.
Yes, that's correct.
Secondly, when the final outcome letter was not copied to the school, inviting them to do a referral.
Yes, that's correct.
Thirdly, on the 9th of April, when Alfonso raised the ADHD position, and that nothing seems to have happened from that, which may have arisen out of a degree of confusion about the new referral process.
Yeah, that's correct.
Fourthly, Dr. Weir's referral, with the caveat that it is possible that that may have trickled into what then happened with Pressfield, but you can't see any records that Dr. Weir's request was actually directly actioned.
Yeah, that's correct.
And fifthly, the Pressfield referral that was made, you accept that if the information had all been pulled together, that would have and should have been progressed.
Yeah, that's correct.
And so it comes to this, doesn't it, that there were multiple failures to press the ADHD assessment for AR forwards.
Yes, that's correct.
In paragraph 80, in a similar way to the issues about delay with the autism diagnosis, I think in relation to ADHD, you accept that it would have been helpful for professionals in AR's care to know about a diagnosis of ADHD if, in fact, the progression of the referral had led to that diagnosis. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you. Turning to my final topics then, please. Changes and improvements at Alderhay. We just deal with some matters in relation to this. In paragraph 60, could we just have that on screen, please? It's page 15, I think. That there is now a process in which, on the autism side, the service has developed so that there is a greater involvement post-diagnosis and services that can be offered. Could you just give a high-level summary of what those are?
Yes, so Alderhay diagnostic team, we're responsible for delivering a workshop which is to the young people themselves. And this explains what autism is in a really neuroaffirmative, strength-based way, and often can be really helpful for young people if they're struggling to accept or understand maybe why they've received that diagnosis. So that workshop is available for ages 11 up to 19, and we deliver that with our specialist clinicians. We also deliver a parent training programme, which is called Riding the Rapids, and this is based around the principles of giving parents the information to be able to identify triggers that may be causing different behaviours at home or things that might be challenging. So it's a very empowering sort of 10-week intervention where we go through working with the family about a goal-based outcome. So they may, want to reduce aggression at home, for example. Then we would work with them step by step to develop an intervention plan. And that was developed in the University of Manchester. And we've had that in place since. But again, that is for parents to opt into that support. And then we also have a commission partnership with Advanced Solutions Community Network, who I have mentioned, and they deliver a workshop for parents and carers to actually understand what autism is and what strategies we can use to put in them reasonable adjustments, as I mentioned earlier, at home, and also change their communication style, things like that. So it's quite comprehensive and goes through all the areas of what autism is. And then also Advanced Solutions offer a coaching model of support. So again, this is very, very helpful for young people when they're struggling to understand diagnosis or how that impacts for them. So it's a very individualised, goal-based approach where the clinician will support the young person one-to-one in an area that they need, support with.
Can I ask you about that fourth one?
Yeah, of course.
You've indicated where it's something that can be used where young people are struggling to understand their diagnosis. Would that individualised coaching have a role for a case like AR's, where the difficulty may be not so much in coming to terms with the diagnosis or understand the diagnosis, but whether there are additional factors of risk to others.
Yes, it would. Yes.
Have there been cases, obviously please don't name names, I know that you won't, but have there been cases where the individualised coaching as part of the autism service post-diagnostic offer has given support to individuals within that cohort?
Yes, so I'm not sure if the inquiry is aware of the Vanguard project in relation to young people who are vulnerable to exploitation and criminality. So we've been involved in that in Liverpool and Sefton since, I think, 2022. And part of that, there was a neurodevelopmental offer developed to support young people with that exact need that you've just described. And the coaching offer was embedded as part of that. So there was a cohort of young people who were deemed very vulnerable to criminality and exploitation, and they received that support, and also family-based coaching as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I might ask if you can just provide us with a written note with some more details in relation to that.
Yeah, of course.
If you would. Thank you. And then also at paragraph 91 of your statement, you set out some details, which I'm just for the moment going to put on screen just in part for the learned chair's note without going through them all. Do the improvements mean that in a case like AR's, in the circumstances where there's concern about criminal behaviour, risk to others, would there now be a process for prioritising the assessment in that sort of case?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, it's completely been revised. So now we have a very comprehensive triage process. So that you triage with 2 clinicians, and any cases where there's any risk presented would be escalated up to the lead professional on duty. And then what we would do is review the case, and we use a risk stratification tool, which has been embedded across Cheshire and Mersey, to identify urgent, enhanced and routine cases. And AR would have been an urgent case, which would have meant that we would have added him to a fast-track list. As he was open to CAMS at the time, we would have initiated our what we call enhanced CAMS pathway, whereby we would have worked in partnership with the case manager to ensure that developmental history and information was gathered straight away, urgently, and then we would have booked them into an appointment with a consultant psychiatrist and speech therapist, where they would have done a joint assessment, looking at risk specifically as well, but also looking at neurodevelopmental conditions, and they would have provided that diagnostic outcome then and there. So it would have been extremely quick, and obviously I mentioned we also have the Vanguard project, which is another arm to it, where we have a close relationship with the YOS service, and we have all children who are open to criminal justice or in any way can also access the fast track as well. So there's a lot of safeguards, I feel, that we would be aware of young people. But not at the time.
But not at the time. And that's a factor, presumably some detail there, backing up the comment you made earlier in your statement about how far the service has moved on.
Yes, I feel, yes.
Right. Just finally, in terms of reflection on events, paragraph 85 of your statement, please, page 22. You said that the only gap that you'd identified at the time of your statement was in relation to clinicians not having checked whether the ADHD assessment had been started. Is that right?
Yeah, I suppose to expand on that really, I suppose the gap of the ADHD assessment as a whole, in all them other circumstances.
We've been through that,
well.
but in that area.
Mm-hmm.
Paragraph 86 over the page, you say that the Meditech Expand system may have contributed to the gap, and you note difficulties in relation to the difficulty over the paper letter not being auto-generated in a way that didn't mean that it was copied. And then in paragraph 88, you say, in the middle of the paragraph, in my opinion, AR received a supportive service during his time with Sefton CAMS. However, I believe that embedding more dedicated training and specific interventions, such as adapted CBT and acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, tailored for children with autism within all CAM services, will be essential for creating positive change. Does that reflect that that's a change that still needs to come, more of the adapted form of CBT and ACT?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just talking, I suppose, as a general term, you know, CAM services are not universally designed for neurodiversity. And although there are very skilled clinicians in Sefton CAM service and Liverpool CAM service, you know, not all clinicians would have had a very, very high level of training in neurodiversity, which I feel is important. So there is work going on in our Cheshire and Mersey partnership to develop sort of a neurodiversity CAMS pathway, so that we can make recommendations around what therapies, what support, you know, what training needs to be embedded across all of CAMS, so that any young person who accesses a CAMS service, you know, is going to get the same level of support. And that work is currently ongoing as part of the Cheshire and Mersey Neurodiversity Recovery Programme.
Thank you. Arising out of the issues that we've explored with previous witnesses, 3 further reflections should be added, yes? There was a delay in the first assessment for AR for autism.
Yes, that's correct.
There was a to fast track his autism assessment against the background of risk to others.
Yeah, that's correct.
And there was a failure arising from poor record keeping to refer his case back into FCAMS, which the Autism Service would have done if it had known of FCAM's original recommendation.
Yeah, that's correct.
Just looking to my left, Mr. Bain.
Yes, Mr. Byrne.
Thank you, sir. I ask questions on behalf of the bereaved families. And just before I start, sir, could I just say that I've had specific permission in relation to question 14 of the Rule 10. I'm aware that quite a lot of it has been covered. So if I'm in danger of duplication, please do not, I know you won't, but please do not hesitate to stop me. And I've set my timer.
I won't hesitate.
I gathered. The point that I'm looking at specifically is that had the assessment taken place closer to what I call the hockey stick incident that you're aware of, aren't you, on the 11th of December, would that have altered both the timing, which I think we've covered, it would and should have been earlier, but would it also have altered the appreciation of his risk to others? And that's what I think I want to just question you about a little bit. You gave evidence, for your note, sir, it was about 10:26 on the live note, that in a normal assessment, you wouldn't expect specific questions on risk to be asked. Correct?
In a routine assessment.
Yeah. But given, and again, just assuming for the purpose of my questions, that there was enough information available following the various meetings, the strategy meeting on the 17th of December, where I don't think there was a member of the ASD team available, but there were enough interagency people there for the messages to get through. Both that meeting and then the meetings with FCAMS later on in January, that had there been a true appreciation that on the 7th of October, the Childline incidents, where what we say was the active homicidal, the murderous intent was clear, but that rather got lost in the wash. Were you aware of that? If that hadn't got lost in the wash and hockey stick was looked on as the second major incident. So if you've got intent to kill, followed by going equipped to kill. So when the professionals were thinking about a proper forensic examination at that stage in January and not delaying, can you conceive of any decision other than to expedite and fast track, even given that there was no fast track official system in place?
Yeah, I mean, I do agree that there shouldn't have been a delay. The risk was obviously very present at that time, and the assessment should have been done then and there. And I think maybe if it had have happened, I mean, the practitioners involved talk openly about how they felt he was autistic, and that is in the record. So I think there was a lot of practitioners around that time who must have been very aware of the symptoms being quite significant. So if a diagnosis had been made then at the time, then I assume the FCAMs would have done the assessment that they refer to, if that makes sense, in the letters. They may have carried on and done that as part of that robust support package. So
so the assessment that they were prepared then to wait for, knowing that it could take up to a year, was really, in truth, given what they all suspected, more of a confirmation of what they thought was his presentation, rather than a genuine question, did he have it? That fair?
I mean, that's how it seems from the records, is that people in their meetings very openly was talking about him as if he may already have been diagnosed, because his symptoms were so significant. So I think the confirmation of diagnosis was just that, a confirmation of what people already had thought at the time.
Right. So had it happened then much more quickly, and had there been a true appreciation of risk, is it fair that the assessment itself would have maybe taken a month? Probably no more than that?
Yeah, that's correct.
So by possibly the end of January, certainly into February, we would have had confirmation that he had ASD.
Yeah.
Okay. He's then in the system. They're talking to each other. There's a proper understanding of the risk. Would it then have followed that they probably would have got hold of the ADHD aspect as well at that time?
I mean, it's hard to say, but I would assume so.
Okay. And towards the end of Mr. Moss's questions, he covered the possible use of lisdexamfetamine, Elvance, something like that. Assuming there wasn't a problem with diet and weight, could you just confirm that that's a sort of, I think it's called a dopamine releasing agent?
Yeah.
And the four main things it does is it reduces impulsivity, improves emotional regulation, less mental noise and distraction, and better concentration and follow-through. So all things that could have really impacted upon his behaviour and the way that he lived his life.
Yeah, potentially if he'd have met diagnostic criteria for ADHD, but we still don't know if he would have. But yes, that is what the medication is designed for in young people who do have a diagnosis of ADHD. Right.
And the combination of high intelligence, lack of empathy, fascination with violence, a potential conduct disorder, and ADHD all add up to a really toxic mix.
Yeah, it is, concerning,
Yeah, okay. And I mean, it may be that you can't help with this last question. You were asked about the effect of delay on autism. Do you know much about the effect of delay on any potential conduct disorder that he may or may not have had?
I mean, what I do know about conduct disorder is the recommendations for intervention are quite similar to, I think, what was offered anyway. So it relates to parent interventions, systemic, like family therapy support. I think there is some consideration of medication when it's quite severe. So, but it's not my area of expertise.
Yeah, okay.
So that's just sort of, yeah.
But just, do you know, but would you agree that early intervention into that particular problem is essential?
Yes, I would, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Benn. Just one area from me, then you're finished.
Thank you.
You've given evidence to an extent about records and
Yeah.
how things weren't always in the right place or weren't easily to be found. So the great example, in one sense, has been the FCAMS letter, which was not on the autism service record. So on that, just focusing on that, what has happened since that has ensured that that won't happen again?
Okay. So following obviously the incident and CQ&C inspection when they visited us, we have made significant improvements regarding the record keeping. So scanning, as it was, is completely gone. What would happen is that the information would be uploaded directly. So it's sort of hard to explain without you seeing it, but the session notes that we would go into one by one with the date, any external report that is received would now be there listed. So, for example, it would say FCAMS report quite clearly. It would say school information ASD quite clearly. So any external reports that are received are now directly visible on the record. You don't have to go through any additional apps and things like that. And the risk assessment information, as it was at the time, you had to go through one by one and find the risk document. Now that has all been collated into one document on the very front screen. So we have a risk assessment for CAMS, which when that is updated, the historic info is kept on there, which I think is really good, but then you're able to update it with your new information. So you can clearly see this happened then, this happened then, this happened then, and it's all in one document. And we also have a neurodevelopmental risk assessment, because I think obviously what was mentioned there, you know, we should be assessing risk in the ASD service. There are some cases where we are made aware of significant risks and we haven't really had anywhere to put that information or to make sure that that is shared appropriately. So now we have another document which sits alongside the CAMS one, which is clearly visible for anyone who goes on the Alderhay record. So they're sort of the two main areas. And I think I mentioned earlier, the referral form as well is a lot more comprehensive. So if another agency wanted to flag an urgent case for autism or ADHD assessment, they can, and they've got that place to write that information so that can be shared.
Are these systems user-friendly?
I would say so, yeah, I would say so.
So it's easy to operate as well as being easy to view if, for instance, you're looking for risk?
Yes, yes, yeah.
Now, does that then mean that when Mr. Moss set out the long list of worrying features of AR's past, and you observed that they would have been on the records, but they were very difficult to find, that problem has been solved by the description you've just given of the changes that have been made? Is that right?
Yes, yes.
So are you confident now that the problems that arose in AR's case, if the systems are applied properly, at least to that extent, would not be repeated in the future? Yes, and I suppose I want to add as well, I mean, regarding the letters,
at the time, obviously, it was a lot of responsibility on administrators to do clinical letters, so we have reviewed that again as a service and as a trust, and the clinicians themselves are responsible to upload letters, so we now have our own access. So if that was now, it would be me, myself, uploading that report, checking the copies, checking it was all accurate. So that's obviously been put in place. And I think obviously there was some concerns about the ADHD assessment not being taken forward. And that has been a very, that has been a concern for me. So since I started really, so in September 2025, we merged together as a full neurodevelopmental team. So as I mentioned when I first was introduced, I am now responsible over both. So if ARs or a similar child was referred to me tomorrow, we would assess simultaneously, so we would do everything together in a holistic way, because it's very overlapping, as you've probably learned from what you've heard, and we would have looked at AR for ASD, ADHD at the same time, and it would have been very much more of a collaborative, supportive assessment.
So very considerable changes, which in themselves carry an element of risk. If you're putting new systems in place, new ways in which people are expected to work, hopefully they will succeed, but they aren't necessarily going to succeed. To what extent is the implementation being monitored?
In what way do you mean?
To see whether it's working, to see whether material that should, for instance, be available, is available in the right form, in the right place, in a comprehensible fashion.
So we do have an audit policy around record keeping, which since I've been in post, we've done a monthly audit around record keeping to ensure that everything is on place. I think we would probably have to look at a wider audit, and we have done this for example, the outcome reports, as you've noticed, the outcome report for this case was not shared with who we'd asked it to be shared with. So now we do an external audit, for example, checking with school nursing service, GP practice. So we've done that to check that the reports are getting to the right place.
Well, what I really have in mind is I've heard the expression used quite a lot over the last few days of people in AR's position being on journeys for their parents.
Yeah.
But whether there is obviously you can't do it with every person who's passed through the system, but whether there's a sufficient investigation taking, as it were, samples, examples, to make sure that this is working as an end-to-end process.
Yeah, 100%. And we are gonna. We're very. It's only October, so the transition only started in September. So we're still very much in that transformation. We have a transformation board. We have regular meetings. We have involvement from our peer forums for that feedback as well. And we will obviously continue. We'll try to continually check and double check to try and avoid any failings.
I may be asking for some updates as to the results of the checks, Ms. Bogan. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
10 to 2.
So yes, could I perhaps ask for 20 to 2?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Thank you for your evidence. 20 to 2.